Elias Thorne lived in a world of numbers, where every digit had its place, every ledger its designated shelf. Yet, in the silent mausoleum of forgotten data, a single, faded image was about to shatter the meticulously built walls of his solitude. In the vast, dim archive room of Evergreen Holdings, Elias was a ghost among ghosts, his only companions, the quiet hum of the HVAC and the rustle of brittle paper. His days unfolded with a quiet, practiced authority. Each movement precise, each file handled with the reverence due to a forgotten relic. This morning, his task was a box from a corner designated Obsolete Company Records Pre-2000. It belonged to a firm called Legacy Company, long since bankrupt, its history reduced to a single, unassuming carton gathering dust. What secrets lay buried in the dust of forgotten companies? Elias, ever methodical, felt a subtle, almost imperceptible tremor of curiosity. Back at his small, impeccably organized desk, Elias began the tedious work of cataloging. He opened a heavy, leather-bound ledger, its pages yellowed with age, smelling faintly of mildew and forgotten ambition. Tucked within its brittle leaves, not as a bookmark but almost hidden, was a folded piece of paper. He pulled it out. It was a child's drawing, rendered in vibrant, almost defiant crayon. A lighthouse, stark and strong, on a rocky, windswept shore. Elias's hands, usually steady as stone, trembled. A simple drawing holds a secret that shatters a man's composure. He felt a jolt, a visceral recognition that stole his breath. The archive room faded, replaced by the warm, sun-drenched memory of a childhood home. Young Elias, perhaps 10, sat cross-legged on the floor, crayon gripped tight in his hand, meticulously coloring the very same lighthouse. His younger brother, Leo, a whirlwind of bright energy, watched, eyes wide with adoration. "It's to guide you home, Leo," young Elias had said, handing over the finished drawing. "No matter what, I'll find you." The memory, vibrant and full of a love that defied time, was abruptly severed by the searing pain of a loss too profound to bear. A childhood promise, a forgotten drawing, and a truth too painful to remember. Elias gasped, his eyes flying open to the dim reality of the archive. The drawing in his hand, crude yet perfect, was unmistakably his. Every imperfect line, every vibrant crayon stroke, was a signature of his own youthful hand. It couldn't be a coincidence. It was too precise, too familiar. Could it be a replica? A cruel trick of memory? Or was it something else, something profound and impossible? What if a piece of your lost past suddenly reappeared, decades later, in the most unlikely place? Elias clutched the drawing, a spark igniting in the long, darkened chambers of his heart. He had to know. Some memories are too precious to stay buried, no matter how painful. The meticulously ordered world of Elias Thorne had been shattered, not by a natural disaster or financial ruin, but by a child's drawing. In the quiet solitude of his cramped apartment, usually a haven of predictable routine, Elias lay awake. The moonlight, a soft silver blade, cut across his room, illuminating the crayon lighthouse drawing placed carefully on his nightstand. He stared at it, the simple lines, a beacon of a forgotten era, a lighthouse guiding him back to memories he had fought for decades to suppress. The weight of that promise, made by a boy to his little brother, pressed down on him, a heavy, suffocating blanket. He remembered Leo's innocent joy, his small hand reaching out for the drawing, and a pang, sharp and visceral, twisted in Elias's chest. Could hope, after so long, be more terrifying than despair? A single photograph can hold a lifetime of unspoken love and sorrow. Unable to shake the image of the lighthouse, Elias rose, drawn to a dusty bookshelf in his living room. Tucked behind a worn copy of a ledger, a relic he'd kept from his first bookkeeping job, was a small, silver-framed photograph. Its edges were soft with time. The black-and-white image faded to sepia. It showed a family. His mother, her smile warm and tired. His father, strong and earnest. A younger Elias, arms wrapped protectively around a beaming little boy, Leo. His brother's smile, even in the faded print, was radiant, unburdened by the world's harsh realities. Elias's finger, usually so precise with numbers, trembled as he traced the outline of Leo's face. A ghost of a smile, fragile and bittersweet, touched Elias's own lips, and a single tear, unbidden, finally tracked a path through the dust of his own forgotten joy. The day a family was torn apart, leaving a promise that echoed for decades. The image of Leo's smile fractured, replaced by a torrent of chaotic memories. The scent of dust and damp cardboard filled his mind, the harsh, fluorescent glare of the eviction notice taped to their front door. We can't keep both of them, Elias." His mother had sobbed, her voice raw with desperation, her face blurred by tears. Boxes were stacked everywhere, a monument to their shattered lives. His father, usually so stoic, sat defeated on an overturned crate, his head in his hands. "Your aunt can take Leo for now," he'd murmured, his voice hollow. "And you, Elias, you'll go to your grandparents." Young Elias, barely 10, had clutched his younger brother's hand, the crayon lighthouse drawing crumpled in his palm. "I'll find you, Leo," he'd whispered, his voice thick with a child's desperate vow. "I promise. This will guide you home. This will guide you home." But the promise had been swallowed by the chaos, by the separate cars, by the distance that stretched into decades. After decades of quiet, a forgotten memory sparks an impossible quest. Elias's eyes snapped open in the present, the faded photograph still clutched in his hand. The echoes of his parents, despair, and his own desperate promise still vibrated in the silent apartment. Exhaustion clung to him like a shroud, but beneath it, a tiny, unfamiliar spark ignited. A purpose. He had lived for so long in the quiet, methodical rhythm of numbers and ledgers, burying the ghosts of his past. But the drawing, Leo's drawing, had ripped open that carefully constructed piece. He would not let it be just a coincidence. He could not. He rose, anew, determined, set to his jaw, the lighthouse drawing a vibrant contrast against the dull wood of his table. He would investigate. He would find the truth. Some secrets are guarded not by villains, but by red tape. The next morning, Elias arrived at the archive with a quiet resolve. He approached Clara, the head archivist, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her spectacles perched on her nose. "Good morning, Clara," Elias said, his voice as measured as ever. "I require access to additional legacy company files, specifically employee records from the period leading up to the bankruptcy." Clara looked up, her expression politely unyielding. "I'm afraid I can't grant that, Elias. Those records are restricted. You'll need formal authorization from the department head." Elias felt a familiar frustration, a minor setback in a quest that already felt monumental. He nodded, a quiet understanding dawning. This would not be a simple matter of sifting through forgotten papers. A tiny detail in a forgotten book could unlock a decades-old mystery. Elias Thorne, the human embodiment of meticulous order, found himself staring at the open ledger, the one that had cradled the lighthouse drawing. His gaze was drawn, as if by an invisible thread, to the margin of a page dating back 50 years. There, almost imperceptibly, scrawled in faded blue ink, was a small handwritten note. "L.T. Lighthouse Project." His breath hitched. L.T. It was too perfect, too impossible to be a coincidence. Leo Thorne. His heart, usually a steady, predictable drum, began to race, a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Could it be? Could this faint whisper from the past be a tangible lead? A real hand reaching out from the abyss of time? The dry, dusty archive air suddenly felt charged with a surge of adrenaline, a jolt of hope he hadn't known his quiet life could still contain. What if a name from the past holds the key to your future? The LT note was a live wire, sparking Elias's meticulous mind into overdrive. He meticulously cross-referenced old project lists from the defunct legacy company, sifting through microfiche and yellowed printouts. Weeks of habit had trained him in the art of archival spelunking, but now a burning personal urgency fueled his search. And then he found it. A lighthouse rejuvenation project was indeed listed for that period, and beside it, the name of a junior architect, Thomas Reed. The name itself felt familiar, triggering a faint, almost forgotten memory, a fleeting image of a wild, artistic spirit from a time when Elias himself had been young and hopeful. Reed. Thomas Reed. The pieces, disparate and cold for so long, were beginning to click into place, hinting at a truth closer than Elias had dared to imagine. when professional boundaries clash with personal desperation. Armed with this new lead, Elias knew his next step. He needed Thomas Reed's personnel file. Approaching Clara, the head archivist, in her impeccably organized office, Elias felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. "Clara," he began, his voice carefully neutral, "I need to access the personnel file for a Thomas Reed, junior architect, legacy company, circa 50 years ago." He offered a practiced, if strained, smile. "Audit discrepancies, you understand. Just routine cross-referencing." Clara, a woman who valued procedure above all else, paused, her gaze, usually placid, sharpened. She looked at him, truly looked at him, with a scrutinizing intensity that made Elias shift uncomfortably. She sensed the tremor beneath his calm facade, the personal urgency that bled through his professional pretense. "Very well, Elias," she said, her voice reserved. "I'll see what I can find. But these older files require special clearance." Her reluctance, though subtle, was clear. When all official doors close, sometimes you have to find your own way in. Clara's polite but firm resistance solidified a growing conviction in Elias. He couldn't do this alone, not through official channels. His quest was too personal, too deeply entwined with his own buried history. That night, in the quiet solitude of his apartment, the dim glow of his old desktop computer illuminated his face. He typed "Private Investigator San Francisco" into the search bar, the phrase feeling alien on his fingertips. The cost would be significant, a heavy burden on his carefully managed finances, a calculated risk that flew in the face of his risk-averse nature. But the alternative, abandoning the search for Leo, for the truth, was unthinkable. He remembered whispers from years ago, a local reputation for discretion, for unearthing secrets others couldn't. Harrison Investigations. His finger hovered over the contact button, a tremor running through him. This was it. A leap into the unknown. A whisper of a memory, a desperate plea, and a detective drawn into an impossible case. Elias took a deep breath. The lighthouse drawing laid carefully beside his phone, a silent totem of his resolve. He dialed. The line clicked. A moment of suspense, then a calm professional voice answered. "Harrison Investigations. David Harrison speaking." Elias's voice was hesitant at first, a raw vulnerability breaking through his usual stoicism. He explained, with a halting precision that betrayed his emotion, the child's drawing, the old company, the lost brother, a story that must have sounded utterly fantastical. Harrison listened, clipped and dispassionate. "An unusual request, Mr. Thorne," he stated, "but not impossible. Discretion, of course, is paramount." The call ended, leaving Elias with a strange cocktail of anticipation and trepidation. He had committed. The search, once a solitary echo in his heart, was now a tangible, active pursuit, reaching out into the wider world. When the past refuses to give up its secrets easily, Elias Thorne sat in his sparse apartment, the faint glow of his laptop illuminating his face as he clutched his phone. The voice on the other end was David Harrison's, professional and clipped, delivering the first fragments of information. "Thomas Reed, as you suspected, Mr. Thorne, junior architect at Legacy Company, known for some rather unconventional designs, left abruptly after the bankruptcy. No immediate family listed in records that far back, and current whereabouts are, for now, a blank slate." Elias felt a familiar knot of disappointment tighten in his stomach. A spark of relief for the confirmation, yes, but the path forward remained shrouded in fog. Any leads on where he might have gone? Or why he left so suddenly? Elias pressed, his voice barely a whisper. A map of old company addresses spread uselessly on his table. Harrison promised to keep digging, but the silence that followed felt vast, filled with the weight of unanswered questions. The past, it seemed, was a stubborn thing, unwilling to yield its secrets easily. When corporate ambition threatens to erase the very past you're fighting to uncover, the sterile quiet of the archive, Elias's sanctuary, was shattered by the arrival of Arthur Finch. Arthur moved with the predatory grace of a man who saw the world in spreadsheets and efficiency metrics. His tailored suit was as sharp as his gaze, his tablet a sleek weapon against anything deemed obsolete. He was an auditor, tasked with streamlining evergreen holdings, vast data, and he saw Elias's dusty domain as a prime target. Thorne. Arthur's voice cut through the air, devoid of warmth, I understand you're fond of these relics, but we're here to optimize, not to curate a museum. He gestured dismissively at the rows of ancient ledgers that were Elias's lifeblood. Time is money, and these dusty files are costing us both. We'll be digitizing the essentials and the rest? Well, sentimentality isn't a line item in our budget. Elias felt a cold dread settle in his chest. Arthur Finch was not merely an inconvenience. He was a direct, existential threat to Elias's quiet world and, more importantly, to his desperate search. The clock is ticking. Can a forgotten past be saved before it's permanently erased? Arthur Finch's words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. My mandate, he continued, his tone chillingly calm, is to ensure maximum efficiency. That means critical files are digitized, and the non-critical, they're disposed of, including, I'm afraid, the entirety of the legacy company archives. We can't afford to hoard historical curiosities. Elias felt a surge of panic, raw and visceral. Dispose? These weren't curiosities. They were the last vestiges of a life, a family, a promise. His hands clenched, an almost imperceptible tremor running through him. He wanted to shout, to plead, to explain the lighthouse drawing, the lost brother, the decades of buried pain. But Arthur wouldn't understand. To him, it was just data, a cost, a liability to be eliminated. The realization hit Elias with crushing force. His time was not merely limited, it was rapidly running out. The clock was ticking, and the past he was fighting so desperately to uncover was on the verge of being permanently erased. Every drawing tells a story, and this one leads to a forgotten beacon of hope. Back in the solitude of his apartment late that night, the fear Arthur had instilled was momentarily pushed aside by a renewed sense of purpose. Elias pored over old San Francisco maps and historical society websites. The lighthouse rejuvenation project Thomas Reed had worked on, it turned out, wasn't for a major landmark. It was for an obscure, privately owned lighthouse, perched on a craggy outcrop just beyond the city's southern reach. He found faded articles, yellowed with age, describing Thomas Reed's unique, almost poetic vision for its restoration. The artist, they said, had seen the lighthouse not just as a structure, but as a, quote, sentinel of memory, a beacon for lost souls. Elias traced the lines of his own childhood drawing, then looked at the old photographs of the real lighthouse. The resemblance was uncanny. Could this isolated beacon be more than just a place of work for Thomas Reed? Could it be a hidden thread connecting him to Leo? A flicker of hope, fragile yet persistent, ignited within him. Against the odds, a small act of kindness can change everything. The next morning, Elias found himself in Clara's office, the head archivist. He spoke carefully, choosing his words with the precision of a surgeon. Clara, he began, his voice low, I understand the pressure to clear space. But the legacy company files, they hold a unique historical value, beyond mere audit. There are narratives, human stories, woven into those ledgers that, once gone, can never be recovered. He didn't mention Leo, not directly, but his earnest gaze, the subtle tremor in his usually stoic voice, hinted at a deeply personal stake. Clara, though stern and wary, saw something in his eyes that transcended bureaucratic protocol. She was a guardian of history, after all, not just paper. I can't stop Arthur's overall directive, Elias, she said, her voice thoughtful. But I can, perhaps, prioritize the digitization of certain collections. That might buy you a little more time with the legacy files. It was a small victory, a reluctant gesture of empathy in a world of cold logic, and it was enough to rekindle the fire of Elias's desperate quest. The rhythmic click of Elias's keyboard, usually the lone symphony in the vast archive, was now occasionally punctuated by the sharp tap-tap of Arthur Finch's stylus against his sleek tablet. Arthur, with his perfectly coiffed hair and a suit that seemed to repel dust, had set up a temporary workstation just a few rows away, a stark modern intrusion into Elias's world of forgotten paper. Elias felt Arthur's gaze on him more often than not, a cold, clinical assessment. Arthur's eyes frequently drifted to the section Elias was diligently working through, the legacy company files. Still sifting through the sentimental junk, Thorne? Arthur's voice cut through the quiet, deceptively casual. Nostalgia is a luxury we can't afford in a modern enterprise. Elias merely offered a tight, almost imperceptible nod, his eyes fixed on the ledger, pretending not to hear the thinly veiled accusation. He felt the auditor's shadow lengthen, a quiet threat to his fragile quest. Later that evening, in the quiet solitude of his apartment, Elias clutched his phone, the receiver feeling impossibly heavy in his hand. David Harrison's voice was, as always, a clipped professional monotone, yet the words he delivered crackled with a potent energy. "Mr. Thorne, I have some preliminary findings on Thomas Reed." Elias's breath hitched. He came from a family of some standing, but was largely estranged. An artist, as suspected, considered a bit of a black sheep. "I located a sister, Martha Reed. She runs a small, eclectic art gallery in the Mission District." A surge of excitement, sharp and exhilarating, coursed through Elias, quickly followed by a prickle of trepidation. "Estranged?" he managed, his voice a little hoarse. "Unconventional life choices, according to my sources," Harrison continued, unflustered. "Apparently, the family disowned him for pursuing art over a proper career. Be advised, Mr. Thorne, family histories can hold secrets even more painful than financial ledgers." The line went silent, leaving Elias with a new destination and a fresh wave of cautious hope mixed with the familiar ache of unspoken sorrow. The aroma of oil paint and old paper, a stark contrast to the sterile dust of the archive, enveloped Elias as he stepped into Martha Reed's gallery. It was a small, vibrant space, a riot of color and texture filled with canvases that seemed to hum with untold stories. Martha, a woman with kind, weary eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled into a loose braid, looked up from behind a counter piled high with art books. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft but guarded. Elias, feeling a nervousness he hadn't experienced in years, introduced himself, vaguely referencing an interest in local artists. Then, carefully, subtly, steered the conversation towards Thomas Reed. "I've heard of his work," Elias began, his voice surprisingly steady. "His vision. It's quite unique. There's a certain evocative quality to it, a profound connection to place." Martha's eyes, initially wary, softened almost imperceptibly. A flicker of something akin to pride, or perhaps a long-buried affection, crossed her face. "Thomas was certainly unique," she murmured, a faint, sad smile playing on her lips. "He saw the world differently. Not many understood that." Martha led Elias deeper into the gallery, her steps measured, her gaze lingering on various pieces. She stopped before a large canvas, its colors muted but powerful. It depicted a lighthouse, weathered and solitary, standing sentinel on a craggy shore. Elias's breath caught. It was the lighthouse rendered with a raw, emotional intensity that transcended mere depiction. It was the lighthouse from his drawing, but seen through the eyes of a master. "This was Thomas's favorite subject for a time," Martha explained, her voice tinged with a distant sorrow. "He poured his heart into this series. Around the time the Legacy Company went under, he was working on that restoration project. He'd just lost someone very important to him. He never spoke of it much, but his grief, his heartbreak, it resonated in every brushstroke. It was as if that lighthouse became a symbol of something he desperately wanted to protect, something he felt he'd failed to keep safe." Elias stood transfixed, his own faded drawing clutched in his hand, a mirror to the masterpiece before him. Thomas Reed, the mysterious architect, had known the same profound loss. As Elias processed the weight of Martha's words, she moved to a small glass display case tucked away in a corner. "He always felt things so deeply," she continued, her voice soft, "especially for family." She opened the case, revealing a collection of small, intricately carved wooden animals. Among them was a tiny, handcrafted bird, its wings spread as if in flight. "This little bird," Martha said, her finger gently tracing its smooth surface, "he made it for his own younger brother, years before everything. He adored him. Said he'd always keep an eye on him, no matter what." Elias felt a pang, sharp and sweet, deep in his chest. A brother's gift, a brother's promise. The quiet, unspoken devotion mirrored his own, a powerful, invisible thread connecting him to Thomas Reed, and through him, to the enduring hope for Leo. He carefully placed the lighthouse drawing back into his pocket, a renewed sense of connection and purpose settling over him, solid and undeniable. When faced with threats, does one give up on a lifelong quest or push harder? Elias Thorne was meticulous, a man who moved through the archive's hushed aisles with the quiet precision of a clockmaker. But even his practiced composure was tested when Arthur Finch, the corporate auditor, summoned him. Arthur's temporary office, a sterile imposition of glass and chrome in a corner of the dusty archive, felt less like a workspace and more like an interrogation room. Arthur, sleek in his perfectly tailored suit, leaned forward across his minimalist desk, his gaze colder than the steel beams that latticed the city skyline. "Mr. Thorne," Arthur began, his voice a low, controlled hum that carried a sharp edge, "your unauthorized research into the legacy company files is interfering with the audit. Your productivity has plummeted. This is a professional environment, not a personal history museum." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy. "I understand nostalgia, but it comes at a cost. Your job, for instance." Elias met his gaze, unblinking. The pressure was a physical weight, but beneath it, a quiet defiance solidified. Arthur's threats were a mere inconvenience compared to the decades of silence Elias had endured. He offered no verbal defense, no explanation. He simply stood, a stoic figure against the backdrop of Arthur's corporate bluster. The weight of Arthur's power was palpable, a suffocating force, but Elias's resolve, forged in the fires of a forgotten promise, was far stronger. When the trail goes cold and hope begins to fade. The small, eclectic art gallery, once a sanctuary of discovery, now felt like a place of dwindling possibilities. Elias had returned to Martha Reed, hoping for another thread, a forgotten detail about her brother Thomas that might lead him to Leo. Martha, surrounded by the vibrant, often melancholic art her brother had created, listened patiently. "I wish I could help more, Elias," she said, her voice soft with genuine regret, her hand unconsciously smoothing the surface of a nearby canvas. "But after the bankruptcy, Thomas just disappeared. He was always restless, always chasing a new light, a new subject. There were rumors, that he went north, or maybe out to the coast. Always painting, they said. But never anything concrete. He was so private, especially after his heartbreak." Elias felt a wave of discouragement wash over him, a cold tide, pulling him back to the shores of his own long-held grief. He'd meticulously probed every memory, every anecdote Martha had offered, but the trail remained stubbornly cold. No mention of a young boy, no specific location, just vague whispers lost to time. He thanked Martha, his frustration polite but evident, and stepped out into the bustling city, feeling more adrift than ever before. How much can one man endure before the weight of the past crushes him? Back in his cramped apartment, the flickering streetlights casting long shadows across his desk, Elias spread out the few documents he had managed to gather. The lighthouse drawing, once a vibrant beacon, now seemed dim under the harsh glow of his desk lamp. 50 years, half a century. It was an immense weight, a chasm of time that seemed impossible to bridge. How could a childhood promise survive such an expanse? He ran a weary hand over the faded photograph of young Leo, his brother's beaming face, a cruel reminder of what was lost. He had searched before, in his younger, more naive days, following every whisper, every possibility. Each dead end had chipped away at his spirit, leaving him with the quiet, methodical life he now led. Was he clinging to a ghost? Was this frantic, desperate search merely an exercise in self-inflicted pain? Perhaps Leo was gone. Perhaps he was unreachable, living a life that had no room for a long-lost brother. The thought, cold and sharp, pierced through him, and for a moment, Elias considered abandoning the quest, letting the past finally claim its undisputed victory. He slumped over his desk, the documents scattered like fallen leaves, the lighthouse drawing a faint, distant star. Just when you're about to give up, a tiny detail can change everything. It was late, the archive silent, save for the hum of the old fluorescent lights. Elias, wrestling with the despair of the previous night, had resolved to finish processing the legacy company files, to put this painful chapter behind him. As he mechanically tidied a stack of minor expense reports, his gaze, trained by decades of meticulous bookkeeping, snagged on a single, almost imperceptible discrepancy. A small, unaccounted-for payment, tucked away in a ledger entry from 50 years ago, simply listed as Lighthouse Project Maintenance. It was insignificant, a mere rounding error in the grand scheme of the company's collapse. But Elias's heart, which he thought had grown numb to hope, gave a sudden, powerful jolt. Asterisk maintenance contractor for the asterisk lighthouse project? This wasn't Thomas Reed's architectural fee. This was for upkeep. Someone was actively involved in the day-to-day operation of that specific lighthouse. It was a thread, fragile as a spider silk, but undeniably there. A sudden jolt of renewed hope, cautious and fragile, coursed through him. Could this tiny anomaly, this whisper in the dust, be a new path? His breath quickened, a thrill he hadn't felt in years. A defunct company, a faded address, and the last thread of hope. Fueled by this unexpected spark, Elias plunged back into the archive with renewed vigor. He cross-referenced the cryptic expense report with old supplier lists, vendor directories, and even faded local business almanacs. Hours blurred into a single, focused pursuit. Then, tucked away in a brittle yellowed binder, he found it. A small family-owned business listed as the Beacon Keepers. Their primary service, lighthouse maintenance. And next to the name, an old address. A long-defunct phone number. The company was long gone, the address likely a ghost of the past, but it was a tangible lead, a direction in the otherwise trackless wilderness of his search. Elias meticulously copied down the address, his hand steady, his mind already mapping out the route. The fragility of this lead was not lost on him. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble. But after so much despair, even the faintest glimmer was enough to ignite a new surge of energy. He would visit that address. He would follow this thread, no matter how tenuous, until it led him to an answer, or to another dead end. This was his last desperate chance. Elias Thorne navigated the unfamiliar, quiet streets, the old address a fragile thread leading him through a labyrinth of forgotten corners of the city. He pulled his modest sedan to the curb, his heart already sinking. Before him stood a relic of a building, an old storefront, its windows long since boarded up, peeling paint clinging to warped wood like desperate memories. A faded sign, almost illegible beneath years of grime and urban decay, read, "The Beacon Keepers." It was a dead end, a cruel trick of fate. 50 years, a lifetime of quiet yearning, and it ended here, in a boarded-up shell. A wave of profound disappointment washed over him, heavy and cold. He had dared to hope, and hope, he knew, was a dangerous thing. But then, as his gaze drifted, a small detail caught his eye. Tucked beneath the main sign, faded but still vibrant, was a hand-painted depiction of a lighthouse. Crude, perhaps, but rendered with an unmistakable affection, a childlike purity of vision. It was the same lighthouse from his drawing, from Leo's drawing. Could some doors close, only for others to be waiting, just out of sight? The sight, so poignant, so unexpected, rekindled a stubborn flicker of determination within him. As Elias stood there, a figure emerged from the small, meticulously kept garden next door. An older woman, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, was tending to a riot of fuchsias and petunias. She looked up, her face etched with kindness, a gentle smile appearing as she noticed him. Elias, usually hesitant to engage, felt an unfamiliar pull. "Excuse me," he began, his voice a little hoarse. "I'm looking for information about the Beacon Keepers shop. Do you know anything about it?" The woman, Eleanor, straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. "Oh, that old place," she said, her voice warm, a melodic hum. "It's been closed for years. Mr. Henderson, the owner. He passed away a good while back." Elias's heart sank again, but he pressed on, a desperate urgency now fueling his words. Did he have a son? Someone who might have kept the business going? Eleanor paused, a thoughtful expression on her face. Yes, he did. A lovely boy, always tinkering with things, always drawing. He loved that old lighthouse. Called himself the lighthouse keeper even as a child. She chuckled softly. His name was Leo. Leo Henderson. He kept the lighthouse tradition alive, he did. Lives out there now, I think. Still keeps it up. A real beacon of hope for the area. Elias felt the world tilt. Leo. His Leo. The name, whispered casually by a kindly stranger, resonated through him with the force of a thunderclap. A forgotten name, a truth that made his heart pound, finally revealed. Just as Elias was about to step out of his car, his phone, usually a silent companion, buzzed with an insistent ring. It was Arthur Finch. Elias hesitated but then answered, his focus still fixed on the lighthouse. Thorne, where in the blazes are you? Arthur's voice, sharp and cold, sliced through the serene air. Do you have any idea the disruption you're causing? This personal research of yours is jeopardizing the entire audit. Consider this your final warning. If you're not back at your desk within the hour, collecting your things, I'll have security escort you out. And those legacy company files? They're being shredded tomorrow, starting with the ones you've been poring over. Arthur's bluster, once a source of suffocating anxiety, now felt distant, irrelevant. His threats, his corporate dictates, were mere whispers against the roar of Elias's purpose. Elias looked at the majestic lighthouse, then back at the phone. He simply hung up, a quiet, resolute click, severing the last fragile tie to a life he was ready to leave behind. When the world tries to hold you back, destiny calls louder. Elias approached the base of the lighthouse, drawn by the faint scent of oil paint. Tucked into the rocky outcrop was a small, unassuming workshop. Through a wide-open door he saw him. A man, older now, his hair streaked with gray, bent over a workbench. His hands, strong and steady, meticulously painted a miniature lighthouse model, each stroke precise, imbued with a quiet passion. The workshop was filled with similar models, with canvases depicting stormy seas and guiding lights, with the gentle chaos of an artist's sanctuary. Elias's breath hitched. The profile was unmistakable. The set of the jaw, the curve of the nose. It was Leo. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, joyful rhythm. The man looked up, sensing Elias's presence. His eyes, the same warm, intelligent brown Elias remembered, met his own. For a long moment, time ceased to exist. In that gaze, a lifetime of separation, of longing, of an unbreakable promise, converged. A flash of recognition, a dawning wonder, crossed Leo's face. After 50 years, two brothers met again, brought together by a child's drawing and an unbreakable promise. The emotional dam broke. The air in the small workshop, thick with the scent of paint and salt, shimmered with an impossible truth. Elias, tears streaming down his face, held out the faded crayon drawing, his hand trembling. It was the lighthouse, vibrant despite its age, a beacon from a forgotten past. Leo's eyes, so like his own, fell upon it, and a gasp escaped his lips. Recognition, swift and undeniable, flashed across his features. He reached out, his fingers tracing the crude crayon lines, then met Elias's gaze. 50 years. 5 decades of unspoken longing, of a promise whispered into the wind, now coalesced into this single, potent moment. Leo, Elias choked out, the name a ragged whisper, a prayer. Elias, Leo responded, his voice thick with emotion, equally disbelieving. Then, without another word, the distance between them vanished. A raw, guttural sob tore from Elias's chest as he stumbled forward. Leo met him, arms wrapping around his brother, holding him with a strength born of a lifetime of absence. It was a reunion not of words, but of bone-deep recognition, of two halves finally made whole. The world outside the lighthouse workshop faded, leaving only the sound of their ragged breaths, and the profound, cathartic release of a love that had defied time. As the initial storm of emotion subsided, the brothers, still clinging to the thread of this impossible reality, began to speak. They sat amidst the miniature lighthouses and paint-splattered canvases, the drawing carefully placed between them. Leo, his voice calm yet filled with a quiet wonder, recounted his story. He had been adopted by the Henderson family, a kind, working-class couple who, by a twist of fate, had been the long-standing beacon-keepers for this very lighthouse. Their small, family-owned business had maintained the structure for generations. "I grew up here," Leo explained, gesturing around the workshop. "They taught me everything about the sea, about the light." He paused, his gaze drifting to a framed photograph of an older man with kind, artistic eyes. "And then, when I was a boy, Thomas Reed came. He was the architect for the Lighthouse Rejuvenation Project for Legacy Company. He was different, though. He saw the beauty, the soul of this place. He saw it in me, too. He taught me to paint, to see the world with an artist's eye." Elias listened, rapt, holding the drawing, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with astonishing clarity. Thomas Reed, the name from the old ledgers. The artist who had poured his heartbreak into the lighthouse. He had been here. He had known Leo. Leo led Elias into the adjoining cottage, a cozy space filled with warmth and, everywhere, art. Paintings of the sea, sculptures of gulls, and, prominently, numerous depictions of the lighthouse itself. He pulled a worn, leather-bound sketchbook from a shelf, its pages brittle with age. "Thomas's," Leo murmured, handing it to Elias. Inside, Elias found not just architectural plans and landscape studies, but delicate, almost hidden sketches of a young boy, Leo. Playing on the rocks, absorbed in drawing, his face alight with youthful innocence. A wave of profound realization washed over Elias. Thomas Reed hadn't just been a mentor, he had been a guardian, a quiet, watchful presence. He had known. He must have known. The man who crafted the original lighthouse drawing, the man whose own heart had been broken by loss, had found Elias's lost brother and silently watched over him, ensuring his love for the lighthouse and for art endured. It was a legacy of kindness, a testament to a connection that transcended formal ties. Thomas, in his own way, had kept Elias's promise alive. Elias felt a surge of gratitude, so powerful it brought fresh tears to his eyes. A silent thank you to the artist who had unknowingly bridged decades of separation. The quiet sanctity of their reunion was abruptly shattered. A sleek, black sedan, utterly out of place on the winding, unpaved road leading to the lighthouse, sped to a halt outside. The door flung open with an impatient thud, and Arthur Finch emerged, his sharp suit a stark contrast to the rustic surroundings. His face was a mask of cold fury, his eyes scanning the scene, landing on Elias with undisguised contempt. "Thorne!" Arthur's voice cut through the salty air, sharp and accusatory. "What in the blazes do you think you're doing? You're supposed to be at Evergreen, digitizing files, not gallivanting at some relic of a building." He strode towards them, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel. "You're off the clock, completely unaccounted for. This is gross insubordination. Get back to the archive now, or I'll be forced to call security." The corporate world, cold and unyielding, had finally caught up. Elias, who had instinctively stepped slightly in front of Leo, felt a resolve solidify within him, harder and clearer than any ledger entry. The years of quiet submission, of allowing himself to be defined by numbers and routine, fell away. He looked at Arthur, not with fear, but with a gaze that held the unwavering conviction of a man who had finally found his true purpose. "No, Mr. Finch," Elias said, his voice, usually so soft, now ringing with an authority Arthur had never heard. "I won't be returning. Not to Evergreen Holdings, and certainly not to your endless pursuit of efficiency over humanity." He gestured to Leo, then to the lighthouse. "This isn't about old files anymore. This is about my brother Leo. This is about a family torn apart by the very bankruptcy your precious legacy company oversaw. And it's about a promise kept across 50 years, a promise that no amount of corporate restructuring or digital archiving could ever erase. Elias stood tall, Leo now beside him, a united front. Arthur stared, his face paling, momentarily stunned into bewildered silence by the sheer, unassailable truth. Arthur Finch stood frozen, his sleek suit a stark anomaly against the rugged beauty of the lighthouse. His face, usually a mask of controlled ambition, was now a canvas of stunned disbelief. The corporate jargon, the threats, the cold logic, all had shattered against the raw, undeniable truth Elias had just laid bare. There was no spreadsheet for a lost brother, no quarterly report for 50 years of separation. Without another word, without even acknowledging the defeated slump of his shoulders, Arthur turned on his heel. His expensive car roared to life, a desperate escape from a reality he couldn't process, speeding away down the winding coastal road. Elias and Leo watched him go, the corporate shadow receding, taking with it the last vestiges of the world that had once held Elias captive. A quiet victory, purchased not with money, but with the courage to speak a long-buried truth. Inside the lighthouse keeper's cottage, the air, once thick with confrontation, now hummed with a different kind of energy. Elias and Leo sat by a crackling fire, the lighthouse drawing displayed proudly on the mantel. The plans for their future unfolded naturally, like a story finally finding its proper rhythm. Elias would move in, trading ledgers for the rhythm of the waves, his meticulous nature finding new purpose in maintaining the beacon that had brought them home. But their vision extended beyond themselves. Inspired by Thomas Reed's quiet mentorship and his own artistic legacy, they decided to establish an art program for disadvantaged youth right there at the lighthouse. A sanctuary where young souls could find their own beacons, where creativity could flourish, unburdened by the weight of the world. It was a new beginning, not just for them, but for a legacy of kindness. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fiery orange and soft lavender, Elias and Leo stood at the very top of the lighthouse. The salty wind whipped around them, carrying the cries of gulls and the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. It was a silence deeper than any Elias had known in his archive, a peace more profound than any calculation. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the faded crayon drawing that had started it all. Gently he laid it beside one of Leo's own more refined but equally heartfelt lighthouse sketches on the stone ledge. Two drawings, born decades apart, now side by side, a silent testament to a journey completed, a promise kept. The lighthouse beam swept across the darkening sea, a symbol not just of guidance, but of the unbreakable light of family love, shining bright and true. Weeks later, Elias Thorne's old desk in the Evergreen Holdings archives stood empty. On its meticulously ordered surface lay a single, crisp resignation letter addressed to Clara, the head archivist. It was polite, professional, yet carried an undercurrent of profound gratitude for the quiet kindness she had shown. He thanked her for the opportunity, for the unexpected discoveries the archives had yielded, and for the chance to embark on a new, deeply fulfilling chapter. Beside the letter, carefully placed, was the original crayon drawing of the lighthouse, a small, vibrant splash of color against the drab, bureaucratic landscape. Elias took one last look at the silent rows of ledgers, then turned and walked away, not just from a job, but from a lifetime of solitude, leaving behind a piece of his heart and a vibrant hint of the future. Elias Thorne, once a recluse in a world of numbers, discovered that true wealth lies not in ledgers or corporate assets, but in the immeasurable treasure of human connection. His journey, sparked by a child's crude drawing, reminds us that the most profound legacies are built not with bricks and mortar, but with unbreakable threads of love, kindness, and promises kept across generations. The lighthouse now stands as more than a beacon for ships. It is a beacon for lost souls, a testament to the enduring power of family, and a vibrant hub where art and hope illuminate young lives. What is your true legacy? What forgotten connections are waiting to be rekindled in your own life? Share your story in the comments below, and remember, sometimes, the most extraordinary stories are hidden within the most ordinary lives.